I've been a paramedic for 12 years. I've seen it all: terrible car crashes where vehicles were crushed like soda cans, heart attacks that struck healthy-looking people without warning, and I've even delivered a baby on the side of the highway during a snowstorm. The mother named her daughter after me. That's the kind of thing that keeps you going through the hard days. But nothing in my career prepared me for what happened at Oakridge Estates last spring. A 76-year-old woman named Margaret Wilson was dying from a heart attack, and I was just yards away from saving her life, until a power-hungry HOA security guard tasered me for trespassing. She didn't make it. And now that guard and the HOA board president who gave him that weapon are sitting in prison cells. This is the story of how rules meant to protect people ended up killing someone, and how justice finally came for Margaret and her family. Before we move to the story, please comment below and let us know from which country are you watching. Like the video, also subscribe channel. That morning started like any other. I arrived at County General Hospital for my 7 a.m. shift, grabbed my lukewarm coffee from the break room, and checked the ambulance supplies with my partner Kyle. We'd been working together for 3 years. He was younger, still had that optimism that sometimes fades after you've seen too much. I tried not to let my 12 years on the job make me cynical, but some days were harder than others. "Quiet morning," Kyle said, leaning against the ambulance. "Maybe we'll actually get lunch today." I laughed. "You just jinxed us. Never say the Q word in the ER." Right on cue, our radios crackled to life. Dispatch's voice cut through the morning calm. "Unit 14, we've got a 911 call from Oakridge Estates, Unit 117. Female, 76, possible cardiac arrest. Caller reports she's turning blue. Priority 1. My stomach tightened. Cardiac arrests are a race against time. Every minute without oxygen to the brain decreases survival chances by about 10%. We had a 4-minute window for the best outcome. After that, the odds get worse with each passing second. We grabbed our gear and jumped into the ambulance. I hit the sirens as Kyle pulled out of the bay. "Oakridge Estates," I said, flipping through our map book. "That's the fancy gated community off Highway 16, right?" Kyle nodded. "Yeah, been there once for a fall. Lots of retirees. Their HOA is super strict about everything." I'd heard about Oakridge Estates. The houses started at $500,000, the lawns were perfectly manicured, and the homeowners association had more rules than the IRS tax code. The kind of place where you could get fined for having your garbage can visible from the street or painting your door the wrong shade of brown. We reached the main entrance in 8 minutes, good time considering morning traffic. A large stone sign welcomed visitors to Oakridge Estates, a secure community. Behind it stood an impressive gate with cameras and an intercom system. Kyle hit the emergency services button by the gate. Nothing happened. "That's weird," he said, pressing it again harder. "This should override the system." He grabbed the intercom. "EMS, we have an emergency call to Unit 117. Open the gate now." After a moment, a man's voice crackled through, "State your clearance code." Kyle looked at me in disbelief. "Clearance code? We're paramedics responding to a cardiac arrest." "No code, no entry." "HOA rules," the voice replied flatly. I could see Unit 117 from where we sat, a blue 2-story house just past the first intersection. We were so close, yet completely blocked by this gate and whatever power-tripping security guard was on the other end of that intercom. I grabbed my medical bag and jumped out of the ambulance. "I'm going in on foot," I told Kyle. "Keep trying to get that gate open and call dispatch for backup." I ran toward the pedestrian entrance, a smaller gate with a keypad. As I approached, I saw a man standing on the other side, mid-40s, stocky build, wearing a black uniform with Oakridge Security printed across the chest. His name tag read Brad Morton. One hand rested on a walkie-talkie, the other gripped a taser. I held up my paramedic ID. "I'm a paramedic responding to a cardiac arrest at Unit 117. I need to get through now." Brad looked at my ID, then at my uniform with its bright red paramedic patches. Behind me, the ambulance lights still flashed. "You don't have clearance," he said, his voice emotionless. "No one enters without proper authorization." "Are you serious?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "There's a woman dying in there. I don't have time for clearance codes." I pointed toward Unit 117. "That's the house right there. I can see it. Please, every second counts in a cardiac arrest." Brad's expression didn't change. "Rules are rules. Call your supervisor if you have a problem." I felt my professional calm cracking. People don't understand what it's like to know someone is dying and you could save them if you could just reach them in time. Look at my uniform. Look at the ambulance. We're responding to an emergency call from this neighborhood. Move aside or open the gate. Brad put his hand on his taser. Step back from the gate. I didn't step back. Instead, I grabbed the gate and started to climb. I'm going to help that patient. You can call my supervisor later, but I'm not letting someone die over a stupid clearance code. I was halfway over when I felt it, the sharp, paralyzing pain of 50,000 volts hitting my body. The taser barbs cut through my uniform and into my back. My muscles contracted violently. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. I fell backward onto the concrete, my medical bag spilling open beside me. The pain was indescribable, like every nerve in my body was on fire. I could hear Kyle shouting in the distance but couldn't respond. Through blurry vision, I saw Brad standing over me, taser still in hand. You were warned, he said coldly. Inside Unit 117, Margaret Wilson lay on her living room floor. Her husband Robert knelt beside her, desperately trying to remember the CPR class he'd taken at the senior center last year. Stay with me, Margaret, he pleaded, pressing on her chest. His hands shook with age and fear. Help is coming, sweetheart. Please hold on. Margaret's lips had turned blue. She wasn't breathing. She had mentioned arm pain that morning, had even taken an aspirin, but they'd thought it was just arthritis acting up again. When she collapsed mid-sentence while watering her plants, Robert had immediately called 911. Now he could hear sirens outside their gate, but no one was coming through the door. The minutes ticked by. 5 minutes. 6 minutes. 7. Kyle finally managed to get through to someone with authority to override the gate. By the time he reached me, I was still on the ground, dazed but conscious. My back burned where the taser barbs had hit. I tried to stand but fell back down, my muscles still spasming from the shock. I got the gate open, Kyle said, helping me up. Dispatch has police on the way too. We made it to Unit 117 8 minutes after arriving at Oak Ridge Estates. 8 minutes when we should have been there in less than 1. I knew before we walked in the door what we would find, but professional duty pushed me forward despite the pain. Robert Wilson looked up as we entered, hope flashing across his face. Thank God you're here. Please help her. I knelt beside Margaret, checking for a pulse while Kyle set up the defibrillator. Nothing. Her skin was cool to the touch. We tried everything, CPR, defibrillation, emergency medications, working for 20 minutes to bring her back. But I knew the truth from the moment I touched her. At 8:47 a.m., I pronounced Margaret Wilson dead. Robert collapsed into a chair, his face hollow with grief. I don't understand, he said quietly. I called as soon as she fell. Why did it take so long? I couldn't bring myself to tell him the full truth right then, that his wife might have survived if an HOA security guard hadn't decided his rules were more important than her life. That I had been just yards away, prevented from saving her by a power trip and a taser. But the truth wouldn't stay hidden for long. As we were working on Margaret, neighbors had gathered outside. One of them, a retired teacher named Alice Chin, had been walking her dog when she saw me get tasered. She recorded the whole thing on her phone, Brad refusing entry, me trying to climb the gate, the taser, everything. By that evening the video was online. By morning it had gone viral. The footage was damning. You could clearly see my paramedic uniform, hear me identifying myself and explaining the emergency. You could see the ambulance lights flashing in the background. And you could see Brad coldly refusing access before tasering someone who was obviously a first responder. Local news picked up the story first. HOA security tasers paramedic, patient dies. Then national outlets. Social media exploded with outrage. I was at home on mandatory leave, my back still throbbing from the taser barbs, when my phone started blowing up with calls and messages. Friends, family, coworkers, everyone had seen the video. My supervisor called to check on me and to let me know that the department was fully supporting me. The police wanted my statement. One call I hadn't expected was from Robert Wilson. I saw the video, he said, his voice rough with grief and anger. That man stopped you from saving my Margaret. Mr. Wilson, 52 years we were married, he continued. Raised 3 children together. Traveled the world. She was the love of my life, and she might still be here if they had just let you do your job. I didn't know what to say. There's no training for this kind of conversation. I've hired a lawyer, Robert said finally. Not just for Margaret, for you too. And to make sure this never happens to anyone else. The police investigation revealed troubling facts about Oak Ridge Estate's security system. Brad Morton, it turned out, was a former mall security guard with a history of excessive force complaints. He'd been hired by Oak Ridge because the HOA president, Richard Collins, wanted someone who would strictly enforce the rules without exception. More disturbing was the discovery that neither Brad nor any of the other security personnel were licensed to carry tasers. Richard had purchased them himself, bypassing proper channels and training. The Oakridge HOA had transformed over the past few years from a typical community organization into something more extreme. After a few minor break-ins, Richard had pushed for increasingly strict security measures. Gates that once opened automatically for emergency vehicles now required clearance codes. Visitors needed pre-approval 24 hours in advance. Security cameras monitored every street corner. Richard defended the measures to police. "We were trying to keep our community safe." "Safe from paramedics?" Detective Lisa Martinez had asked. I gave my statement to the police and the district attorney. Being a first responder gave my words extra weight, but the video was what sealed it. No one could watch that footage and justify what happened. Meanwhile, I was struggling. The physical pain from the taser subsided after a few days, but the emotional toll was heavier. I couldn't stop thinking about Margaret. What if I had arrived 5 minutes earlier? What if I had somehow gotten past Brad faster? What if I had rammed the gate with the ambulance? The department psychologist told me this was normal. "You didn't fail Margaret," she said during one session. "The system failed both of you." I wasn't sure if I believed her yet. Oakridge Estates erupted into chaos. Overnight, a community that had prided itself on conformity and order became bitterly divided. Many residents were horrified by what happened. They organized protests at the clubhouse, demanding Richard's resignation and a complete overhaul of security policies. Some put up handmade signs, "Paramedics welcome here," and "Humanity over rules." Others defended the HOA and Brad. "We've had break-ins before," one resident told a news crew. "Security is important. It was an unfortunate mistake, but rules exist for a reason." This divided response only intensified when Robert Wilson filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the HOA board, Brad Morton and Richard Collins individually. He sought $5 million in damages. Robert also filed a formal complaint with the district attorney, pushing for criminal charges. "My wife died because of their actions," he stated in a press conference, his 3 adult children standing solemnly behind him. "This wasn't a mistake. It was criminal negligence." The DA agreed. A week after the incident, Brad Morton was arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter and assault. Richard Collins was charged with criminal negligence resulting in death. As the criminal and civil cases proceeded, life at Oakridge Estates changed dramatically. Emergency meeting after emergency meeting was held. The remaining board members tried to distance themselves from Richard, claiming they hadn't known about the tasers. Security personnel resigned in droves, unwilling to be associated with the controversy. And somewhere in all this chaos, residents began talking to each other, really talking, often for the first time. They shared stories about Richard's increasingly strict rules, about fees that seemed to multiply every month, about feeling like prisoners in their own community. "I got fined $100 because my grandchildren's toys were visible in my backyard," one elderly woman revealed at a community meeting. "I was too embarrassed to tell anyone." Others nodded. Similar stories poured out. The picture that emerged wasn't of a community protected by reasonable rules, but of residents living in fear of their own HOA. 6 months after Margaret Wilson's death, the criminal trial began. I was called to testify along with Kyle, Robert, and several Oakridge residents. Walking into the courtroom was intimidating, but I focused on telling my story clearly and honestly. I described arriving at Oakridge, being denied entry, and the moment Brad tasered me. "In your professional opinion," the prosecutor asked, "would Mrs. Wilson have had a better chance of survival if you had reached her immediately?" "Yes," I stated firmly. "Cardiac arrest patients have the best chance of survival if CPR is started within 4 minutes. I was at the gate within 2 minutes of arrival. The delay caused by the security guard reduced her chances significantly." Brad's attorney tried to suggest I had been aggressive, that his client felt threatened. But the video spoke for itself. You couldn't watch it and see anything threatening in my behavior, just desperation to reach a dying woman. Richard Collins presented a colder appearance on the stand. He showed little remorse, instead focusing on justifying his security measures. He admitted to purchasing tasers without proper licensing but claimed he never intended them to be used against emergency personnel. "We had a protocol for emergency services," he insisted. "Brad failed to follow it. Yet you gave a weapon to an untrained security guard and instructed him to enforce rules, without exception," the prosecutor countered. "Did you ever specifically tell him that paramedics or firefighters should be allowed immediate entry?" Richard's silence was damning. Medical experts testified about cardiac arrest survival rates and the critical importance of rapid response. A former HOA board member revealed that emergency access had been discussed in meetings, but Richard had dismissed concerns as unnecessary and potentially compromising community security. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury reached a verdict. Brad Morton was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter and assault with a deadly weapon. Richard Collins was found guilty of criminal negligence resulting in death. The judge didn't hold back during sentencing. "Mr. Morton, you put adherence to rules above human life. You saw a clearly identified paramedic responding to a life-threatening emergency, and you chose to use a weapon against them rather than allow them to do their job." Turning to Richard, he continued, "Mr. Collins, you created a system that valued rigid rules over common sense and human compassion. You armed guards without proper training or authorization, and you fostered an environment where following protocols became more important than saving lives." Brad received 5 years in prison. Richard received 3 years. Both would face lifetime bans from working in security or community management. The civil case never made it to trial. Faced with the criminal convictions, the HOA's insurance company settled with Robert Wilson for the full $5 million. In the aftermath of the trial, Oakridge Estates underwent a transformation. Richard and the entire HOA board resigned. A new board was elected with a focus on rebuilding community trust. Their first action was dismantling the excessive security measures. Gates were reprogrammed to automatically open for emergency vehicles. The guard stations were removed. Tasers were banned. A direct hotline to emergency services was installed. The new board president, Alice Chin, the same woman who had recorded the video, spoke at the first meeting. "We lost our way as a community. We became so focused on keeping people out that we forgot to take care of the people within. That changes today." Rules were simplified. Fines for minor infractions were eliminated. Residents were encouraged to talk to each other about concerns rather than filing formal complaints. Slowly, a real community began to emerge from the shadow of the old regime. Neighbors who had never spoken now checked in on each other. Community gatherings that had once been formal, tense affairs became relaxed potlucks and game nights. Robert Wilson remained in his home, supported by neighbors who brought meals, helped with lawn care, and simply sat with him in his grief. The settlement money didn't bring Margaret back, but it did allow him to establish the Margaret Wilson Memorial Fund for Emergency Medical Services, providing scholarships for paramedic students and equipment for rural ambulance services. As for me, I returned to work after a month of leave. The first call to Oakridge Estates came 3 weeks later. An elderly man had fallen and broken his hip. As we approached the gates, they opened automatically. Residents waved as we passed. Someone had even put up a sign by the entrance, "Thank you, first responders." The pain of that day will never completely fade. I still think about Margaret, about whether I could have done something differently. But I found some peace in seeing the changes that came from her tragedy. Last week, I was invited to speak at the dedication of a memorial garden at Oakridge Estates. In the center stands a small stone plaque. In memory of Margaret Wilson, her loss taught us that rules without compassion are not worth following. May all who need help find open gates and helping hands. It's been exactly 1 year since that morning at Oakridge Estates. I still work the same shift, still partner with Kyle, still respond to emergencies across the county. But I'm different. We all are. Robert Wilson calls me sometimes. We've developed an unexpected friendship. He doesn't blame me for what happened. "You tried to save her when others stood in your way," he told me once. He's found purpose in his advocacy work, pushing for laws requiring all gated communities to provide immediate emergency access. The Margaret's Law bill is currently moving through the state legislature with bipartisan support. Brad and Richard remain in prison. I haven't spoken to either of them, though Brad sent a letter of apology through his attorney. I'm not sure if I'm ready to forgive yet, but I understand better now how systems can corrupt people's judgment, how rules designed to protect can end up causing harm when they're followed blindly. Oakridge Estates has become a model community, hosting workshops for other HOAs about balancing security with common sense and emergency preparedness. The story of what happened there has sparked changes across the country, as communities review their own policies and access protocols. Yesterday, I responded to a cardiac arrest call in another gated community. The gates opened as we approached. A resident was waiting to guide us to the right house. We reached the patient within minutes of arrival. She survived. As I watched her being loaded into the ambulance, conscious and stable, I thought about Margaret. In some small way, she was there too, Her story had helped save this woman by ensuring we could reach her in time. Rules matter. Structure matters. But Margaret's story reminds us all that compassion matters more. No rule should ever stand between someone who needs help and those trained to provide it. I carry that lesson with me on every call. And I know that somewhere, in communities across the country, gates are opening a little faster, rules are being applied with a little more humanity, and lives are being saved because one woman's death taught us all what really matters. Margaret Wilson didn't die in vain. And for a paramedic who couldn't save her, that knowledge offers some measure of peace.